Hello, Mishpucha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother, and I am back with a Friday Reads video. And as I am filming this, Joe Biden has now officially surpassed Donald Trump in terms of the overall vote count in both Pennsylvania and Georgia, where I live. So I'm super excited about that, and I hope that it will that will continue to be the case. So yes, even though election season and election day has now turned into election week, it's now taken a surprisingly good turn. I was on the edge of my seat all day yesterday, slowly watching the gap between Trump and Biden narrow in Georgia, and I think when I started watching, sometime around like 9:30 yesterday morning, they were separated by about 20,000 votes, and then by the time I went to bed, they were separated by fewer than 2,000 votes. And then when I woke up this morning, Biden was in the lead. So I'm so excited. It's not a very far lead. I think it's by only about 1,100 votes right now, but I'll take it. I'm really happy. So after my gushing about that, let's get into what I actually read this week. So I finished one book. I'm currently reading 5 books, because why not? So let's get into it. So the book that I finished this week was Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. I liked this overall. So this book really revolves around John Singer, who is a deaf-mute man who lives in a fairly small town in Georgia in the 1930s, yeah, because they do talk about Hitler's rise to power and things that he's doing in Europe in the book, so it has to be set in the 30s. So, like I said, the action sort of revolves around Singer, and there are 4 different characters in this town from kind of different walks of life. You have Mick Kelly, who is a 12 or 13-year-old girl who's sort of tomboyish and really likes music. You also have Benedict Matty Copeland, who is an African-American doctor, and he's also an atheist, and because he's an atheist and a Marxist, he's sort of, and also just like highly educated, he sort of is alienated from his children for that reason. And then you have Biff Brannon, who is a recent widower and who owns a cafe in town and is very sort of observant and likes to watch people and sort of reflect on them and their lives. And then you also have Jake Blount, who is a recent transplant to this small Georgia town from elsewhere, and he is a socialist and like a labor unionist agitator kind of guy. So all 4 of these characters end up trying to befriend Singer, and they all come and talk to him about their, fears, hopes, dreams, problems, etc. And they all feel like that Singer, this deaf-mute man, is really the only person who understands them. And again, it's very telling, right, the fact that they all befriend this man who, can't actually, he does communicate with them a little bit, but basically, he's just kind of there as their sounding board for all of their projections and hopes and fears and dreams, etc. So I think the book asks a lot of interesting questions about whether, our human relationships, right, about whether we can actually ever know another person or can be known by another person. Because even Singer himself does not escape this sort of relationship with another person. Early on in the novel, you see that for many years he has lived with another deaf-mute man, a big Greek fellow named Spiros Antonopoulos. And again, kind of right at the beginning of the book, Antonopoulos is taken off to a sanitarium because he kind of can't behave himself in a public setting. And Singer is sort of terribly lonely without his friend, because that was the person that he sort of communicated all of his own hopes and observations and things to, even though Antonopoulos played a similar role to Singer that Singer plays to the other characters in the book, in terms of just kind of, sitting there and listening and you know, Singer assumes that he understands everything that he's telling him and taking it in, but we don't really know if he does or not. Just like Mick and the doctor and Biff and Jake also don't all know if Singer is really taking in everything they're saying or not, although they assume that he is. So anyway, so I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. And I liked it overall, but I did feel like because it follows 5 different perspectives, it kind of kept me a little bit at a distance from getting to know the characters on the kind of level that I would have liked to. And that could have been an intentional choice that Carson McCullers made to sort of keep you as the reader at a slight remove from all of the characters. I don't know. But I would have liked to have felt like I was more kind of invested in the characters and knew them all a little bit better. I also feel like the story primarily revolves around Singer and Mick Kelly, because we see Mick kind of go from adolescence into adulthood throughout the course of the novel. But I actually felt like, for me, Dr. Copeland and Jake Blount were the most interesting characters, so I kind of wish that I had heard and seen more about them and their lives. So I liked it overall. I would recommend it, especially if you have an interest in books with a variety of different viewpoints, or if you have an interest in American literature, especially from the first half of the 20th century, and especially from the American South. So, Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Alright, so in terms of what I am currently reading, as I said, I'm currently reading 5 books. So Lindsay and I are continuing our buddy read of Ann Petry's The Street. We are about 40, or I'm about 40% of the way through this right now. Lindsay could be ahead of me, I don't know. So this is the story of Ludi Johnson, who is newly separated at the beginning of the book from her husband, and is now taken on the role of a single parent. And she and her son at the beginning of this book move into basically a slum. And so we're sort of seeing Ludi struggle to figure out what it is that she and her son are going to do. And we see her sort of struggle to figure out if staying in the building in which they currently live, like what the long-term repercussions of that are going to be for her and her son. So that's basically where we're at in this right now. We have seen kind of her backstory as far as how she got to this place. We've also seen a little bit from some of the other characters who live in the building. So Lindsay observed that, you know, for that reason it kind of has some vibes of Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place, which is true, even though this precedes that. So that's still going well, and I'm still, you know, we're still entertained and engaged. I'm also still currently reading the complete stories of Franz Kafka. I am about, I guess, 2/3 of the way through this. And it's quite long. It's about 460 pages, and just this morning I got to page 325. So I still have a ways to go, but I'm almost through the longer set of stories, and then it goes to like very short stories, which sometimes only take up, you know, less than a page, or at the most they take up maybe 4 or 5 pages a piece. So I imagine I might finish this within the next week, but I am enjoying it. So the stories that Kafka actually published in his lifetime, I don't know if you can see this, but they're all marked with an asterisk in the table of contents, and I have found so far that it seems to me, for the most part, that the stories that Kafka actually published in his lifetime seem more fully realized and complete than the unpublished ones. A lot of the unpublished ones, again, there's something about them that feels somewhat incomplete, or there are entire fragments of them missing, or, you know, several pages missing, that the editors or translators note. And again, it's not the case with every single story, and there are some of the ones that were published that I read and I was like, I'm not really sure what the point of that was. And there were some ones that have been unpublished that I read and quite liked. But again, for the most part, I feel like the stories that were actually published in his lifetime were more sort of fully realized and complete. But I am still enjoying this, and I love sort of how weird Kafka's stories are. In fact, just this morning I read a story called, was it called Investigations of a Dog, I think, and it's just like 40 pages of a dog's philosophical musings about life. So that was sort of charming and interesting. But yeah, so this is still going well, and like I said, I probably will finish this up in the next week, but we'll see. I also, this one I don't have a physical copy of because I'm listening to it on audiobook, but I'm listening to Ijeoma Oluo's So You Want to Talk About Race. This was not on my November TBR, but it came available from my library, and because I had just recently finished Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and this is also a book in that same vein that I have been wanting to read, I thought, let me just get another audiobook and start listening to it. And I have to say, I really like this so far. I'm about 40% of the way through it, and I find Oluo to be an engaging and sometimes humorous writer, and the person who's narrating the audiobook, who is Bonnie Turpin, is doing a great job. So yeah, so I quite like that so far, and basically the chapters are set up in kind of the form of a question. So they're, questions like, why is everyone telling me to check my privilege all the time? And is police brutality really always tied to race? And et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, every chapter sort of explores a specific question that has to do with race. So yeah, I quite like that so far, and the audiobook is not super long. It's fewer than 8 hours total, and like I said, I'm about 40% of the way through it. It has 7 parts, and I think I've listened to 3 or 4, so I'm sure I will finish this in the next week. I also recently, in fact, I think I just yesterday started reading William Deresiewicz's Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite, and I'm already about a third of the way through this. It's read pretty quickly so far. I find it very engaging and compelling as a read, and basically Deresiewicz's premise is that people who end up going to elite institutions like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, etc., have been kind of pushed on along the path of achievement for their whole lives. And so basically by the time they get to college, which is a time where Deresiewicz holds, and I agree with him, that you should be sort of exploring who you are and what it is that you want out of life. The kids who wind up going to Ivy League schools have, again, been sort of so pushed along the path of achievement that they don't know how to do anything except strive to make A's and strive to get a job that makes them a lot of money. And when they go to college, even though they're going to these elite institutions like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, etc., they're not actually getting what you should get, or sort of what the ideal thing is to get out of college, which is to figure out how to think for yourself and to explore your identity and figure out what it is that you really want out of life. So this is all very interesting so far, and again, I'm finding it a quick and pretty compelling read, so I don't know that I'll finish it the next week, but I would not be surprised if I do. And then the last book I'm currently reading, or in my case rereading, is Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. This is the last novel that I am teaching in my online course on the novel this semester, and like I said, I am rereading this book. So I originally read it not that long after it first came out in either late 2016 or early 2017, I don't remember now, but long enough ago that, now that I'm teaching it, I need to reread it so that I can, come up with quiz questions and discussion questions and things like that. So I am also about 40% of the way through this, so this is sort of the common thread of my reading this week. We're at 40% of a lot of things. So this is the story of Cora and Caesar, who escape from the Randall plantation in Georgia and are taken along the Underground Railroad, which in Colson Whitehead's reimagining is a literal underground railway system. And pretty much every state that Cora and Caesar wind up in is its own sort of unique representation of something that life was like during the antebellum period. So like when they get to South Carolina actually has a much more seemingly progressive attitude toward African Americans. And that's not an accurate historical representation of how South Carolina was during the antebellum period, but again, each state is its own sort of state of possibility. And so each state allows you to see an aspect of what parts of the country were like during the antebellum period. So there's also that element of sort of magical realism to it. So it's not meant to be specifically an accurate historical representation of what things were like, but just telling you, again, here is something that gives you a picture of what some places in the United States were like during this time. So anyway, so it's good. So I've read 4 chapters of this so far, and I need to read another 4 by Sunday so I can post more quiz questions and discussion questions. So I may or may not also finish this by the time I do another Friday Reads video, because I do need to keep ahead of the students. I'm enjoying my reread of this so far, and it's going well. So okay, so that's everything. It's everything I either finished this week or I'm currently reading. I would love to hear if you have thoughts about any of these books. Please feel free to leave me a comment down below. I would also love to hear what you've been reading and enjoying this week. So that's all for me. I hope you're doing well and staying healthy. I hope you're doing good reading whatever you're reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call your mother?